Accutron watches present The Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture, with your hosts David Graver and Indrani. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
I think there's this therapeutic element to a drum beat. There is something very therapeutic about feeling the rhythm of a steady drum, and that's something that I always was lacking in classical music, as there are elements, especially when I played the cello in an orchestra, we always kept the bass going, right? And that was fun for me. That's, I think, where I learned how to program and write for bass instruments like cello and even 808s.
The voice you heard at the top of the show is today's guest, composer, writer, producer, and pianist Chloe Flower. But first up, me, Indrani Palchodri, and David Graver here on a new episode of The Accutron Show. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic Space View 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design, combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed. Again. The Accutron Space View 2020.
And Johnny, we have a very special guest today, Chloe Flower, who both of us happen to know through very different types of circumstances.
I love Chloe. She is such a bright and brilliant young talent who is really bridging all of the different kinds of classical music, pop, rock. She's everywhere.
I had the great privilege of seeing her perform twice now, and the first time I wasn't familiar with her blend of classical, instrumental, and this sort of pop undertones, this monumental sort of swept away blend of the past and the present. And I still think about how she is making music that no one else is making right now.
I think it's very exciting, and she's innovating in a way that keeps the roots of classical music. She's not just taking samples, which so much of modern music is, but she's deeply integrating and kind of sampling the modern back into the classical in a way. I think it's very indicative of who she is as a person with deep resonance in social justice and human rights. We met talking about working on human trafficking, which is something we're both working on in very different ways. And then we expanded to talking about scoring films together, and there's so many ways in which Chloe's work is impacting the world.
I feel as if she's always out there trying to make something or make something better.
Yes.
Well, I'm looking forward to specifically discussing genre because we all play with this word all the time. Genre. What genre is it? And she doesn't really fit into any one particular box, and I think people try to find boxes to understand music. The best way to understand her music is to listen to it. The best way to understand her as a person is to see the work she's doing to change the world.
And you know what's wonderful? She also brings so much vitality visually. So I've watched so many of her videos, and there's so much engagement, so much fun, and it's infectious seeing how much she's enjoying herself. Really makes the experience so special.
I have a feeling this is going to be one of our best episodes yet. Chloe Flower up next on The Accutron Show.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Chloe, thank you so much for being with us today on The Accutron Show. The first thing that I want to talk about is something I'm sure everyone wants to ask. Genre. Classical music means something very, very specific, pertaining, I think, to the past. And other genre terms are also thrown around, like new music or new composition. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us about whether or not you identify with a particular genre and give us a little explainer as to why.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again for having me. I'm so excited. But yeah, no, this is a question I get asked a lot, especially because of, Popsicle. Pop plus classical was kind of an idea, not really a genre. But I think, as an artist, for me at least, being confined to a specific genre can be confining. I'm not just classical, but when I do hip hop, they'll call me a hip hop pianist, but I'm not just hip hop, right? So the idea of Popsicle for me was the idea of just popularizing instrumental music in general, because instrumental music is so unique. It can kind of be film sounding, it can be classical sounding, it can be baroque sounding, it can be pop, it can be blues, it can be jazz, and so there's so many different ways to use the piano specifically. So yeah, I think there's no such thing as new, right? Everything is kind of an idea, and so I think more for genres. I think with social media and with technology, as artists, it's so much easier for us to genre bend. And the idea of, mixing from, classical, Western classical, is a specific genre. People often say classical music, but there is it's a specific genre within Western classical music, right? So it's a specific time period. So even within that, genre bending from classical to baroque early music, it's all music. And I think, yeah, I don't think there's necessarily anything new happening. It's just kind of new ideas on top of previous ideas.
It's so lovely to see you, Chloe, and it's so exciting to see how your career has moved in so many directions, and the ways that you collaborate with people and that you shape music in such innovative ways. What what do you think made your performance with Cardi B stand out so much? I mean, it was kind of a watershed moment in a way. Can you tell us a little more about how that came to be?
Yeah, Cardi saw me on Instagram, so this is again the power of social media. For me, at least for instrumentalists, I think classical musicians in particular have been able to really shine through social media, and kind of popularize this old art form. But yeah, she found me there, and I think it was a lot of different things. I think it was a combination of her putting me where I was in the middle, on top of the fact that we happened to have Liberace's piano, on top of the fact that she allowed me to write three solos, and so I had a real highlight in not at the top, and so everything, people thought that it might be her playing at the piano because they said welcome Cardi B, and then it's me. I'm not Cardi B, right? And so I think it was a lot of different moving parts. It was just really an amazing moment that I think couldn't have really been. And it was also her first Grammy performance. She was the biggest artist at the time, right? So a lot of moving parts, a lot of variables that helped make that a very viral performance.
Can you step back to the origin of your passion for music? Was there a song or a moment or even an instrument that wasn't the piano that moved you first?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a violinist. That was always my dream, and I played violin very early on. But my sister also played the violin, so I think my mother thought it was a bit competitive. And since she was older than me, she was the elder sister. She has priority over me. This is very Asian cultural a thing. The eldest daughter and the eldest child. So I kind of moved more towards cello and piano. I One thing I love about stringed instruments and why I played cello for 10 years is because I love the ability that specific instrument has that the piano can't do, which is a percussive instrument. They can vibrato and they can kind of mimic the human voice in a way that the piano just can't do. We have a decay that, just kind of dissipates, which is also really beautiful, but just different. And my parents said before I could walk or talk, I was in the crib and I heard this Beethoven theme that would come on occasionally. My parents loved Beethoven's Piano Concerto Number 3 in C minor. And they said every time it would come on, I would recognize it and kind of get up out of my crib and try to dance to it. So that was kind of the moment where my parents were like, well, she understands this theme, so she must understand music in a different way, so let's give her lessons. That was kind of the defining moment that I don't remember. But yeah, growing up, I loved practicing. I used to wake up at 4 a.m. on my own. No one told me to. And I would practice 3 hours before school. So I loved it. Yeah.
That's always a question that when you have such a prodigious talent and starting at such a young age, at 2 years old, people often wonder, is it something that's imposed on a child, or is that something that you just were really drawn to? Do you feel like there was a trade-off for having that musical excellence so young?
I think it's a combination of both. I think for me, I was extremely driven and I had really small hands. And I didn't know until I was in my 20s that I was like, in a way, set back because my hands were so small, but I knew I had to practice more. But I think for me, my parents, I think because I'm Asian, people always ask me, did you have a tiger mom? That's the celebrated book. And I did in some ways, but it was more that my parents gave me access, right? And noticed the desire that I had in music early on, the access that I had, the lessons that they gave me, even driving me to New York twice a week from Pennsylvania. It's 8 hours round trip. That kind of that was kind of pressure in itself. It's like my parents are investing this money and this time in me, and I can't just screw around. But I was definitely self-driven. I think in this kind of industry, you have to have. Your parents can only push you so hard.
That's wonderful.
Both Andrani and I have known you for some time, and we met under really magnificent circumstances where you, in fact, taught me how to pair music with champagne. And it was such a breathtaking, like, swept away scenario with music and art and food and drink. And I'm wondering if you can talk about music outside of a concert hall or music elsewhere, the way music works with pairing with food and drink.
Oh, absolutely. They've done so many studies on music and the brain, specifically about food and color and how you perceive sound and visual, environmental aspects, like just, with smell, specifically. Smell is, one of our strongest, senses. And so I think the idea of kind of curating your taste through sound is so fascinating. Like anything with sound is fascinating to me. I mean, not just because I'm a musician, but when I think about how sound can affect us on a subconscious level, it's really exciting. And I think that's part of why I love film music so much is in film with the visual, you can really guide the listener. And I felt like I was doing that with Krug Champagne. Like I was like creating a tone and a vibe. And so as you taste, you can really, especially if you close your eyes, when I'm listening to music or tasting something for real, like I always have my eyes closed because, it's like you can really perceive the taste and the sound, together without that third element of sight. And so I thought it was really fun, really cool, very unique, experience. And even the sound of the glasses and the sound of the actual bubbles, I wanted to incorporate that into the song, but we didn't get to that. We did a more traditional approach, but yeah, that's something I definitely want to do.
Just following up on that Krug collaboration, the next collaborator was Ryuichi Sakamoto, who honestly, sometimes speaking about, brings tears to my eyes. You've actually performed Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and you've done a recording of it. Can you just talk about that briefly? Because that's one of my favorite pieces of recorded music ever. Same.
It's also one of mine. Ryuichi Sakamoto is such an inspiration to me, specifically as an Asian composer, because, he is a person of color that, growing up, when I was in conservatory, I actually started piano lessons at 2 years old. So from 2 years old, I played basically 3 instruments. In all of the years until I graduated, I had never been given a piece of music to learn that wasn't written by a white man specifically. And so to see someone like Ryuichi, I was like, wow, he's Asian and his music is amazing and it's so cutting edge. Like he was one of the first to really experiment with electronic too. And so, he really stepped outside the box and, and also, like he's very chic, the way we saw him at Krug, but he also, back in the day would wear feathers and he was, quite outside of the box and ahead of his time. So in many ways, I looked up to him, not just as a musician, but as an artist as a whole. He reposted my video on his stories and I literally died. It's like, should I retire? Is my life complete? He saw my video and he reposted it. Like it was so amazing. Yeah, it was he's also with my label at Sony Masterworks. And yeah, I love him as an artist. His music is it's like meditative almost. It really takes me to another place. And that's what it did for me at Krug again the year after. It was just phenomenal experience.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. Well, that brings me to how we met, which was kind of the opposite scenario from how you met David, working on anti-trafficking campaigns and strategizing how to tell stories for transformation, for social justice and human rights. And I'd love to ask you to share a little more about your work for trafficking and other social justice initiatives.
Yeah, no, I got involved in anti-human trafficking all the way back in 2006. And at that time, it was kind of before Instagram and social media wasn't as prominent. We kind of had YouTube and Twitter, I think. And so it became kind of an awareness campaign. And then, once people became aware of human trafficking, it was like, gosh, every year it got more and more depressing. As the numbers, it was like $1.5 billion a year industry, then 3, then 5, then 15, then 20, now $150 billion a year industry. It was like the numbers were going up exponentially. And, I realized that, the awareness is something that is definitely important for people to talk about, but also prevention became really important to me. And so that's when I started working with the UN. And I remember having to give my very first speech, and I was like, I'm supposed to talk about music education, but I also have to talk about anti-human trafficking. And then I realized that music education is actually a tool of prevention against human trafficking because of all of the things that music education programs teach, like, you see like violence go down in communities, racism goes down. Basically all of the things that you can't really teach a child. You can't say to them, like, be more empathetic. They kind of have to learn that through experience. And music education teaches that empathy and that, it's so egalitarian. Like I thought about, all three of us right now could be sharing a music stand in an orchestra. We could not necessarily be on the same sports team. So in that way, you have like a community, a new nucleus, a new community of kids who are from completely different cultures. And so by definition, like by default, I mean, you end up becoming more tolerant. And so like all of these things that music education teaches can be a preventative tool to fight human trafficking. So that's kind of been my latest mission is using music education. Not just in anti-human trafficking, but so many issues like gang violence. They're all related to lack of resources, poverty, and music education. I think can really overcome material poverty in that way and really elevate a community. Not just the kids, but like the parents and the aunts and the whole community around them. You see this transformation, and so that's kind of long answer. Sorry. Went off
No,
on
it's,
a
it's
rant.
wonderful to hear the
Don't get me
passion you
started.
have for giving back, for elevating, for educating music students around the world and shifting culture. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I think people think that like I don't want to learn an instrument because I'm not talented or because I'm not smart or because I'm not going to become a musician. And it's like totally the wrong way of thinking, trying to, recalibrate parents and kids and saying, hey, music education is just as important as math and science. Just because you're not going to become a professional athlete doesn't mean you should never exercise. Same with music,
The cello is a deeply historic instrument. The piano has been around for centuries. Technology informs and infuses your work as well. Can you talk about that with us?
Yeah. I've always loved hip hop and I've always loved rock music. And I think there's this like therapeutic element to a drum beat. Like there is something very therapeutic about feeling the rhythm of a steady drum. And that's something that I always was lacking in classical music as there are elements, especially when I played the cello in an orchestra, like we always kept the bass going, right? And that was fun for me. That's, I think, where I learned how to program and write for bass instruments like cello and even 808s. But I think, experimenting with everything we have is just fun. It's just like a new neural pathway I'm creating in my brain. Like composing and producing like gives me an actual headache because I'm like, what is happening? It's not just like learning what's on a page when I'm used to, but I'm like, wait, where can I find this sound? Where do I look? It's so complicated. And I just, I fell in love with producing and I had to fall in love with it because I couldn't find a producer that could understand how classical music ebbs and flows, because pop music is quite repetitive. But classical music without lyrics, if it's as repetitive as a pop instrumental track, it's going to be too boring. So, I needed someone who could change the drum patterns. Couldn't really find it, so I learned how to do it myself, and continue, exploring. Sounds expire. Like, I don't like a certain hi-hat anymore because it's like so 2016. But so you're, constantly having to keep up. It's like a whole nother job.
Yeah. Well, in a world of samples, do you think it's tougher for young people to learn how to play classical music?
Actually, I think it's become almost easier. I have been working a little bit with Apple, and I worked a little bit with Meta as well on some apps that have virtual reality keyboards. And you can actually, I think one of the biggest problems for music education, it's specifically in the United States, has been the kids, the public school systems, they don't have access to instruments and teachers. And so when you have, a virtual keyboard, you kind of eliminate the instrument barrier. It's almost like an added thing and an added element that we can exploit. But also like apps on phones and on iPads have like little piano apps. So there are, I think the technology is growing in a way that we may be able to use it as a tool, but there's nothing that can replace a real instrument. You know, that's our biggest barrier.
I think that was great. It's really fascinating to hear about these new tech ways of doing something that's so ancient and bringing it into accessibility.
Yeah, and you see classical music, is so old, hundreds of years old, but it's evolving with us, with technology, and it continues. The instrument, the piano, was a completely different instrument than what you see today. At one point when Bach was composing, he actually composed on two separate, like his left hand was down here and his right hand was down here, which is why you encounter a lot of problems in Bach on a modern day piano. He performed on and composed on a harpsichord. Then after that came the forte piano. Then after that came the modern day piano. So, but the fact that we still hear Bach today on a modern piano, how it's evolved with our evolution, is just like really amazing. I think worth appreciating.
Fascinating.
Thank you for such a thoughtful answer, Chloe. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back on this episode of The Accutron Show.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection. Reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s, the Legacy Collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for your future.
And we're back with Chloe Flower, talking about the history, the evolution of music, and it's so fascinating. And I'd love to understand from you, where do you see your music evolving, and is there a role for AI in the future of music?
I mean, AI is so amazing. I think there's a role for AI in everything in all of our futures. I don't necessarily know if AI could perform in the same way that a real live musician could perform. But in terms of songwriting and creating music, I think AI would have to rely purely on what it's programmed to do. So it's still coming from somewhere human, right? So, but I think, I would love to use AI to help me notate the technical elements of music production, like, hey, I need a clock sound. AI, find me the best clock sound. Those kind of things I think are going to be really interesting to me in terms of AI and music.
And how do you see your music evolving?
I don't know. I so much of my inspiration comes from travel and from experiences. So I think, each decade I've been working, like I've kind of evolved into a different sound. And so I'm wondering that myself, like where I'm evolving to for album 3. Right now I've been writing a lot of original music and it's all sounding kind of sad. So I don't know why, but that's, I'm trying to create these big bangers that are great for touring. But, so far I'm kind of in this place where everything is sounding a bit melancholy and slow. So that's kind of where I am now. But I think evolution wise, Yeah, it just kind of depends on where my life takes me. We'll see.
What are you listening to at home or when you're on the road?
So I love classical music. I've been listening to a lot of classical music. I listen to a lot of Bach and I listen to a lot of early music. But I also listen to a lot of old school, like early 2000s. Like I'm obsessed with I'm even obsessed with like Backstreet Boys, like boy bands. I listen to everything. I from 1995 until, just early this morning, I was listening to This Is How You Do It by Montel Jordan. I don't even know when that came out, but I was rocking out to it. I was like dancing so hard to it. And, and so I love the classics, and I get a lot of inspiration from Motown too. I think I've been listening to a lot of Motown as well. Like basically everything.
Beautiful. I'd love to ask you, who do you think is the Beethoven of today? Or, are there are there people who are really innovating in the same ways that that some of the historical innovators changed the face of music?
Beethoven came out like of a very specific time period, and I think but one thing that was different about his time than ours is kind of the like Beethoven was like a rock star. Mozart was like, Justin Timberlake. Like they were like rock stars at their time. And that type of music was really popular. It was the only music that like the high society people listened to. And I think in order for us to have like the next Beethoven, we have to really prioritize music education, because we're turning out all of these sports geniuses, right? Because we're putting so much funding into sports education, and it's great. Sports education is amazing. But, until we have a demand for music education and we see kids lining up and excited about learning an instrument, we're going to miss out on those Beethovens of our time, because a lot of kids, just don't have access. And even so much more today than during Beethoven's time, music was not a priority. Back then, it was like everybody wished they could listen to music, and everyone wished they could take a piano lesson, but you had to be a man, you were prioritized as a man, and also you had to be wealthy. And so I think now, for me, it's up to our government, it's up to our school districts to really to find those next Beethovens. So that they don't miss out on on their talent. But yeah, I think like artist wise, like I think it's really cool what Jacob Collier is doing. How he incorporates his audience and all these different sounds, and he's a like more of a jazz artist, but he, what he does. Yeah, I think Beethoven, if he were alive today, he would use all of the sounds. I think he would use 808s. I think he would tap into hip hop and pop music. So.
One of the things that I love very much about my colleague is that she's often out there trying to change the world, and I feel like music has the power to change the world as well. If you can give us a blueprint for music education, equitable music education, what does that look like? What's the dream?
I think the dream is that every public school and private school, my sister sends her kid to a private school and they don't have a music teacher. So they don't have music education. He has to take viola lessons outside of school. So in a perfect world, every school in the United States, especially, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, and high school, every school should have access not only to a music teacher, but to instruments. I think that I always say music education can change the world, but like in one generation. Like you can see like I will go to a school. I've donated a few pianos to Compton Unified School District, and you see an immediate change in the energy, the class, the community. In like a year, in one school year, all of a sudden you have these kids who are learning an instrument, and they have an instrument that they call their own. And in many of these situations, kids don't have anything of their own. They have to share everything, share a bedroom, share a bathroom, share supplies, school supplies. And so when a child has their own instrument, it kind of gives them a sense of confidence and nobility and identity. And these are all of the things that prevent them from going into making bad decisions, whether it's drugs or violence or gangs or trafficking, whatever that circumstance may be. Music actually gives them a sense of, not just purpose, but really a sense of identity and it becomes harder to exploit somebody who's confident and somebody who, who feels self-worth. And so in that way, I think if you saw music education implemented in every school in the United States, I think you would see a real change in the whole entire community. Like parents will come out to concerts and be like, "Oh my God, that's my son, that's my daughter," and they're really proud, and they would have never come out to anything, or before that. So it makes a huge difference, and I think it ripple effects into the entire community.
It's wonderful to hear the power of music and that sociological structures it creates. And there's also this innate the vibrations, right? The tapping into the rhythms of the universe in a certain way, coming outside of yourself, but also having that collective joy, creating something that you can share with your community. I think it's so exciting, and we really underestimate the social and the psychological benefits of music.
Music therapy is like another result of music education, right? So it's like you get, multiple benefits.
Fantastic.
Can you let us step into your creative process a little bit? Do you hear things in your brain and you're like, I have to turn this into a song. I have to make this into something?
Yeah, too many. I have recorded over 200 songs at the studio with Kenny. Every time I have an idea, I record it down. I have a Steinway Stereo now, which is a MIDI capable piano, which allows me to record an idea and it saves it in the piano iPad. So like in 6 months, I can come back and it'll play what I had written that day. It'll just record. So yeah, definitely. I'm inspired all the time. Like I was walking down the street the other day at 6 a.m. after working out. I work out really early at 5. And I heard all these like sounds that I never normally hear, because it's always like quite loud and busy on the streets. And I was like, oh, I want to use that sound in a song. So I'm like over here, like using my audio mic to like my phone recording app to like record things. But yeah, I think inspiration for me comes from everywhere, like I said.
Wonderful. Is there anything that you're working on right now that you can share, any or tease anything for the future?
Yes, I'm working on a documentary film for incredible actor Jeffrey Wright, and we're working on this documentary about interpreters in Afghanistan. And then I have my third album I've been working on, and I'm performing for the Capitol Fourth with the National Symphony Orchestra on July 4th in DC, and so that's going to keep me very busy until July. I can't think about anything else other than those three things.
For people who are less familiar with your work than we are, what would you recommend the one thing they start to listen to first?
Oh my gosh, I think one of my favorite, I think my most recent project was my Christmas album. And listen, I'm the type of person that listens to Christmas all year long. Like I am so down for this. So if you're in the mood to listen to Christmas, because it's like, it's a little something for everyone. It has classical, it has pop, it has Joni Mitchell. Like it's, it's a little bit, it's something for everyone. I would say start there because Ariana Grande.
I listened to it in the shower this morning. I listened to your Christmas album in the shower.
Yeah!
I'm not embarrassed. I'm proud.
Yes, I love you. I love that. Oh my God.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to introduce us all to the varied work that you do. It's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed speaking with you today and looking at how music can enrich all of our lives. Thank you so much.
Yes. It's never too late to start an instrument.
Yes.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit accutronwatch.com. Remember to check out our special edition Accutron products in collaboration with La Paulina Cigars, Estabrook Pens, Aceline Publishing, and Stave Puzzles. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time. This is Bill McCuddy.